The city of Bath in Somerset is synonymous with elegance, riches, fashion and well-being. The Romans built structures to take advantage of the thermal springs that surfaced at Bath, and by the 17th century, claims were made that the hot saline waters cured everything from leprosy to infertility. Under King George III, the town developed with iconic neoclassical buildings, and people from all backgrounds, good and bad, descended on Bath. Restless spirits are said to wander the streets of this ancient, beautiful city. Numerous landmarks and private residences are home to spectral figures, and even parks and gardens are said to be haunted by phantoms and shadows who refuse to leave. Welcome to the Ghosts of Bath. Designed by John Wood the Younger in 1769 and located in the centre of the city, the Bath Assembly Rooms are a Grade 1 listed building. Created as a new venue for balls, concerts and gambling, the Assembly Rooms became known as the place to be seen in the city, the venue being described as the most noble and elegant of any in the kingdom. Built in iconic honey-coloured Bath stone, decorated with fine art and crystal chandeliers, the venue was also used for auctions and afternoon teas, with sandwiches, crumpets and strawberries. The Assembly Rooms are home to a resident ghost, who's been haunting the venue for centuries, and another spirit, who began haunting in the 1960s. The Assembly Rooms we see today opened with a grand ball in 1771 and became famous among fashionable Georgian society, being visited by Jane Austen and Charles Dickens, along with nobility of the time. Mothers brought their daughters to Bath for the social season, ideally to marry them off to a suitable husband, and would attend events where rather rapidly one might meet all the eligible men currently in Bath. At a concert in 1779, attended by around 800 ladies and gentlemen, 60 members of the nobility were present. One of these attendees may still be present at the Assembly Rooms to this day. A mysterious man, known as the Man in Black, has been seen numerous times in the Assembly Rooms, as well as Savile Row and Bennett Street in the nearby vicinity. He was first witnessed in the early 1800s and was seen more frequently in the mid to late 20th century, including during the filming of a Jane Austen novel at the Assembly Rooms. He was witnessed just outside the Assembly Rooms in March 1950 by Cynthia Montefiore, a local artist who reported the events to journalists shortly afterwards. She said, "I was walking from Portland Place to George Street. When I reached the end of Savile Row, a man approached me from the corner of Evans and Owen's store. He wore a large black hat, rather resembling the old-fashioned Quaker hat. There was no one else in sight. And then I suddenly had the feeling the person I was facing was odd and unearthly. I didn't feel frightened. I had a distinct view of him. He was small, thin, and walked with a stoop." After this event, Cynthia sketched an image of the man. Since that day in 1950, the Man in Black has been seen numerous times. In 1972, 3 other witnesses, by the names of Mrs. Harrison, Jill Wixon and Mrs. Graham, all residents of Bath, Each sketched an image of the apparition. All 4 sketches were included in Margaret Royal's book, Local Ghosts, and all depict a man in black, slightly stooped, and wearing a black hat. Another observation, possibly of the same figure, occurred in 1974 by Eileen Parrish from Wootton-under-Edge. She was parking her car opposite a department store when she witnessed a man walking down Savile Row. He stepped into the road, hesitated, turned back, and walked towards the front of the assembly rooms. For a moment, she took her eyes off him and he vanished. She was convinced he could not have reached the end of the road in such a short space of time. She described the figure as dressed in the same style as we associate with Guy Fawkes, with a black cloak and black breeches, but she did not include any mention of the hat. One witness was former Regimental Sergeant Major Emmett, who was a caretaker for the assembly rooms for many years. He witnessed the man in black when he was in the boiler room on a cold January day. As he stoked the boiler, he felt he was being watched. He turned to see a figure in the doorway, dressed in a black cloak and hat. They stared at each other. Emmett held his gaze, refusing to look away. After a few seconds, the figure in the doorway slowly disappeared. Perhaps the most recent observation of the man in black occurred in 1986, during the filming of the BBC's adaptation of Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. A member of staff at the assembly rooms was watching the filming by secretly observing from a corridor, ensuring she was well out of sight. As she watched, she became aware of a man, oddly dressed in a black heavy wool cloak, stood to her left. She was sure he was a member of the cast in costume, but she began to feel uncomfortable in his presence. As she turned to absent herself from the area, the solid apparition simply vanished. Could the man in black be John Wood the Younger, the architect behind the assembly rooms, still visiting his masterpiece today? Could the man in black be from a different time period altogether? Some residents of Bath are certain of his identity. We'll uncover more in a later story. In April 1942, over 400 people were killed in a series of air raids on Bath, and the assembly rooms were bombed and burnt out. Restoration followed, and the assembly rooms reopened in 1963. Since the late 1960s to the present day, members of staff have often felt the presence of a benevolent spirit, that of a reassuring or helpful force that behaves in the opposite manner of a mischievous entity. Staff have felt a calming sensation overcome them before hectic and stressful events. Items such as cups and saucers, cutlery, and folded tablecloths have been moved in readiness to tables themselves, ready to be laid out. One member of staff, when asked to remove dead and wilted flowers from a flower arrangement, went to obtain scissors and newspaper. When she returned to the arrangement, many of the dead stems had been neatly laid out next to the display. Who this mysterious soul is, nobody is absolutely sure, but some believe this is a male energy, perhaps belonging to a person who used to enjoy visiting the assembly rooms in another era. Built around 1720, the Garrick's Head, today a much-loved pub in the very heart of the city, was for a time the private home of Richard Bow Nash, a celebrated dandy who was integral in Bath's growth and development. The building is reputedly rife with paranormal activity, linked to murder, and its owners' indulgences and pastimes. Beau Nash became well known as an organiser and promoter of Bath's social functions. Before Beau Nash arrived in Bath, there were no established rules of etiquette. People arrived to balls dressed incorrectly. Card players who were notorious cheats would swindle establishments and other players relentlessly. Drunken brawls and duels were frequent, and accommodation was filthy and unfit for occupation. Beau Nash knew that wealthy would tire of these shenanigans and drew up a code of behaviour for public entertainments. He did much to improve the city's appeal and attract more investment. When the existing master of ceremonies was killed in a duel, Nash seamlessly took over, upgrading the baths, lighting the streets, banning both men wearing riding boots to functions and smoking in public rooms. He also encouraged women to stop wearing aprons to functions, claiming, as he removed one from over the Duchess of Queensberry's dress, that they were only for abigails. However, it must be noted that in the 20 years Nash lived at the Garrick's Head, he used the premises as a private gambling club for the rich and somewhat disreputable folks he liked to spend time with. Nash was a compulsive gambler and was criticised for womanising with an array of ladies, but his quick wit and charm meant he won widespread admiration from the most wealthy patrons of Bath. A heavy-set man, dressed in Regency clothing, wearing a distinct long brown wig, has been seen throughout the Garrick's Head. He is often heard before he is seen, and his black leather boots squeak on the polished tiled floor of the time. However, he never speaks and is always silent. He is said to be the victim of a murder that occurred on the premises in the early 1800s. A man discovered his wife was having an affair with another affluent man about town. Disgusted and humiliated, he happened to find himself at a gambling table in the Garrick's Head, directly opposite the man he understood to be his wife's lover. Incensed and enraged, the husband lunged forward at the man, missing his heart with his sword, but still mortally wounding the enemy, who died moments later. Having witnessed the death of her lover, the wife, distraught and weeping, rushed up to the top floor, quickly pursued by her furious husband. Moments later, she crashed through the top floor window to her death. Did she fall, or was she pushed? Was her death intentional or accidental? Both the murdered man and the unfaithful wife allegedly roamed the floors and corridors of the Garrick's Head. Some say the energy of this dramatic episode and the accompanying outbursts of emotions are responsible for the screams of the lady, who appears in grey or white, sometimes accompanied by the scent of jasmine. Sometimes she glides mournfully. Other times she rushes past patrons who are left puzzled by the experience. The owners of the premises have experienced what appears to be poltergeist activity. Unlike most poltergeist activity that seems to be short-lived and centred on the energies of an adolescent in the premises, the activity here has been witnessed over many years, numerous times, and without any set pattern or regularity. In the early 1970s, landlords, Mr. and Mrs. Welch, both witnessed 2 candles rise from their holders without assistance on top of a bedroom table. They hovered momentarily, then flew towards Mrs. Welch, just missing her head before landing at her feet. Scratching and tapping on wooden floors is common, as is the knocking on the kitchen door cupboards. Some are convinced the activity is worse when the premises are taken over by new owners. In 1963, a landlord named Bill Loud observed a heavy till located on the bar appear to levitate, hover, then suddenly fly into a wooden pub chair, smashing it to smithereens. In addition, he reported electrical items, including refrigerators behind the bar, being unplugged for no reason, bar stools moving from their correct locations, and money going missing and being discovered in locked rooms days later. On one occasion, a £1 note disappeared from a dressing table drawer and was found in the middle of the floor in a vacant, locked bedroom above. The unusually cold and seemingly threatening cellars are particularly active, with a landlord named Robert Simmons reporting a large bunch of keys moving in the lock of the door whilst he worked in the cellar itself. A mallet used to seal wooden beer casks would go missing, only to be found outside of the cellar itself, despite nobody else being in the area. Sometimes the mallet would vanish, never to be found again. Guests staying at the Garrick's Head have reported hearing loud dragging sounds and thumps in the middle of the night, as well as knocking on their bedroom door. Handles seem to turn, and ghostly laughter and arguments have also been heard. Many of the guests, entirely unaware of the premise's reputation, are shocked to discover the stories and history of this much-loved Bath landmark. Numerous private homes in Bath are reputedly haunted. From properties in the Circus to Kensington Place, from the Royal Crescent to Broad Street, strange tales of ghostly goings-on are rife. Number 19 Bennett Street, located between the Circus and Lansdowne Road, and only a few doors up from the Assembly Rooms, is reputedly haunted by the ghost of Admiral Arthur Phillip, founder and first governor of New South Wales, who lived at the residence for a number of years towards the end of his life. In 1786, Phillip was appointed by Lord Sydney as the commander of the First Fleet, a fleet of 11 ships that brought the first British colonists and convicts to Australia. Consisting of 2 Royal Navy vessels, 3 storeships and 6 convict transportation vessels, the fleet set sail from Portsmouth on the 13th of May 1787, with over 1,400 people, including convicts, marines, sailors, civil officers and free settlers. The journey of over 15,000 miles took 252 days to eventually arrive at Botany Bay in New South Wales, where a colony was planned to become the first British settlement in Australia. On arriving at Botany Bay, Phillip found the site unsuitable, as it had poor soil, no reliable water source, and no secure anchorage, and searched for a more habitable site for a settlement. After some exploration, Phillip decided to go on to Port Jackson, and on the 26th of January, commemorated to this day as Australia's National Day, the Marines and the convicts landed at a cove, which Phillip named for Lord Sydney. He became the first governor of the colony, but by 1792, Phillip's health was deteriorating. By the time Phillip sailed home in December 1792, the colony was taking shape, with official land grants, systematic farming, and a water supply in place. He retired from active service in 1805, and he died at his home, 19 Bennett Street, Bath, in 1814. Some say he died of natural causes, others say he lost his will to live. He is buried at St Nicola's Church, Bathampton. There are two different accounts of the ghost of Admiral Philip at 19 Bennett Street, and both were included in Mr. Meeham's famous Houses of Bath in 1901. Extracts were published shortly after the death of Louisa Bowie in 1914, who had lived in the house her entire life. Mr. Meeham wrote, "The Admiral has, on the most positive assurance of the Bowie family, revisited his old Bath residence on more than one occasion since his departure from this life. Even Miss Bowie has seen him. She describes him as quite an ugly little man. On one occasion, when she saw him, it was in the evening. She was coming downstairs when suddenly there brushed by her going up the brusque, commanding figure of a man. He walked rapidly in an authoritative manner, as if a personage of some importance and with apparent sense of right. It seems nobody is sure in which room Admiral Philip took his last breath. However, Louisa Bowie felt quite certain. The probability suggests the back room on the drawing room floor, for a long time occupied as a bedroom by the late Miss Bowie. In that room, the uniform shape has more often appeared. It would seem that there is ghostly irritation that this room should be occupied at all, for on occasion the occupant would be disturbed by unearthly noises. Slamming or banging of doors, shaking of windows, stamping up and down the stairs. Years earlier, a servant at the house witnessed the apparition of Admiral Philip, and the following account was published in the same book. A servant girl one day excitedly rushed to her mistress, exclaiming that there was a gentleman walking about upstairs, dressed in a blue coat, with breeches, silk stockings, and gold-buckled shoes of the portrait now in the National Gallery of London. Miss Bowie, with a calm, majestic manner, pointed to a miniature upon the mantel-shelf and asked, "Was that the gentleman?" Of course it was, and the miniature was a portrait of the Admiral. That is all I can tell you of the ghost. Many believe this famous Bath resident is the man in black who haunts the assembly rooms to this day, dressed in a black hat and cloak. Could it be that Admiral Arthur Phillip can't bear to leave his beloved Bath, the city where he passed away in 1814? The current Theatre Royal adjoins the Garrick's Head pub. It was built in 1805, and this Grade II listed building has the capacity to hold an audience of 900. Shakespeare and serious plays were popular, along with comedies and even pantomime. In 1815, Joseph Grimaldi played the clown in a production of Mother Goose here at the Theatre Royal Bath. Despite years of success, the popularity of the theatre began to wane, and in April 1862, the building suffered a serious fire, leaving only the exterior walls still standing. The decision to rebuild was made, and after a slow start, the theatre became more popular, attracting larger, regular audiences to a variety of comedies, drama, and Gilbert and Sullivan operas. Many famous names have appeared on the stage at Bath. During the 1920s, Russian ballet dancer Anna Pavlova and English actress Mrs. Patrick Campbell both performed on the boards here. The theatre is said to be haunted by some of the apparitions that appear in the neighbouring Garrick's Head. The apparition of a lady in grey who fell from a top-floor window of the pub makes an appearance in the theatre, particularly in the corridors of the lower circle and in one of the boxes at the rear of the auditorium, just on the left. The scent of jasmine is associated with her presence. She was witnessed by Anna Pavlova, who had no knowledge of the theatre's haunted reputation. After a performance, she asked who the lady dressed in old-fashioned clothes was, but the box had been unsold that evening. This left both the ballerina and staff completely puzzled. The Lady in Grey was witnessed in the same box on 2 other occasions, notably in 1975, during a production of The Dame of Sark, when Dame Anna Neagle reported witnessing the Grey Lady in the box, staring at the stage after the production was over. In 1961, Australian actress Hazel Coppin reported an encounter that she had whilst on the stage at Bath. During a scene from the play, when Miss Coppin was kneeling downstage, she distinctly felt something brush past her. I was so certain that something or somebody had touched me that I reacted quite visibly. A few minutes later, I was not in the least surprised to notice the shape of a little old lady seated in a previously empty box near the stage. Could the Lady in Grey, who appears in the box on the left-hand side of the stage, be the same apparition who appears in the neighbouring pub? Could she have been an actress at the theatre, whose looks and charm attracted the attention of her murdered lover? Could the Lady in Grey be somebody else? We may never know. A rather odd story at the Theatre Royal is that of a butterfly that appears each Christmas inside the building itself. Winter pantomimes always brought great numbers who would enjoy the theatrics, jokes, costumes and scenery. In 1948, the decision was made by the owners to stage a pantomime of Little Red Riding Hood. A feature of the performance was a butterfly ballet, with butterfly-themed costumes and shimmering butterfly backdrops. Stories vary, but some say during a rehearsal, a living tortoiseshell butterfly appeared on stage, much to the cast's amazement. Others say a dead butterfly was discovered on the stage, and that only hours later, the producer, Reg Maddox, had a heart attack and died. Ever since this time, it's been believed by the cast that a live tortoiseshell butterfly had to appear to the cast before the season commenced as a sign of the panto's forthcoming success. This has happened numerous times over the years, with the legend becoming quite well known amongst actors and employees. In 1979, the butterfly appeared in a performance of Aladdin and landed on well-known game show host and personality Leslie Crowther's lapel. Crowther, playing the part of Wishy Washy, had no doubt the butterfly was a symbol or reincarnation of Reg Maddox. He had known Reg Maddox well, and in his 1994 autobiography, Crowther wrote, "Dear old Reg, he stuck around for days and days. Sometimes we spotted him in the front of the house, and sometimes backstage, but I'll never forget the first time he fluttered down from the spotlight. And yes, the pantomime was a big success." A butterfly appeared to other actors, including Honor Blackman in 1985, when she appeared as the Demon Queen in Jack and the Beanstalk, a pantomime that became a huge success. In February 1951, one of the actors failed to turn up to a rehearsal of Little Miss Muffet. The cast began to panic, and the building was searched, including the actor's dressing room. A tortoiseshell butterfly was found in the dressing room, lying dead on some of the actor's possessions. Later that evening, just before the curtain went up, Mr. Henry Adams, due to play the part of Polly Flinders, was found dead in his lodgings. Bath is truly a city of splendour, history, arts and culture. But a darker side of this city is often overlooked. The ghostly figures from days gone by seem to integrate effortlessly into this bustling and vibrant city. Just who lurks inside its iconic buildings? Who are you sharing your pint with at the Garrick's Head? And who might be sitting next to you as you watch a performance at the Theatre Royal? I hope you like these stories from the wonderful city of Bath. And as is often the case when I make these videos, I'll get emails from viewers who've got stories relating to a location. And I did have several emails regarding ghosts in Bath and also Somerset. And some of those stories I will save and incorporate into another video on the ghosts of Somerset. There was an interesting email that I received from a viewer named Rebecca. And many years ago, she had a relative on her father's side. And when he was a young man in the 1950s, he worked as a lifeguard at the Bow Street swimming baths, which eventually closed in the centre of Bath in 1978. And he told Rebecca that the building, which is no longer there, was definitely haunted, and very odd things would happen while he was on duty there. And one of the strange occurrences that would take place there involved the lifeguards hearing a terribly loud, agonising scream, and this was heard quite frequently. And the screams would be way above the noises of the families and the children, just playing in the pool. And the lifeguards, as soon as they heard this, would blow their whistles several times, and the pool would fall silent. That was the sort of rule there. And these screams would still ring out, and the lifeguards would have to go into full search and rescue mode, and they'd have to go and check all the areas, the changing rooms and all of that sort of stuff. But they'd never find anything. They'd never find anybody in agony. It seems to me that in any location where you've got water, that possibility of death is going to be there, whether it's in the swimming pool, in the sea, all of these things. I know that a young girl contracted meningitis and died in 1978, I think from this water in this swimming pool. But I did find details of a death at this swimming pool where a young lad was diving off the diving boards and he struck his head and he died in hospital just later. Mooney, stop. And at the time they were starting to drain the pool, so the water level was going down, and the lifeguard said to them, to these boys, don't jump off the diving board, whatever you do. And he went and did it. And one of the other boys managed to break his wrist in the process as well. So they must have just been sort of messing around, I think. And it all got demolished in 1998, and it's been replaced by a very new spa on that site. Whether any ghostly cries are heard in this modern spa, I don't know. But you can see this new spa in the middle of this picture. But I'd really like to thank Rebecca for sharing her story with me. Regarding 19 Bennett Street and Admiral Arthur Phillip, I did find another story related to this property. And in 1890, which was the year before Louisa Bowie inherited the house, her older sister, who was the owner at the time, she wanted to get rid of some excess bits and pieces from some of the rooms. And at that time, it was apparently unknown that the house had been occupied by Admiral Arthur Phillip. Louisa Bowie's sister contacted a company that does wardrobe clearances, and they were asked to take some boxes from one of the wardrobes. And they were told that the room had not been touched for 40 years. And when they went through the items, they found lots of old books. And one of the things they found was a print. It seems that this print started to piece together the puzzle that Admiral Arthur Phillip must have lived at the property at some point. Records were checked, and indeed it was confirmed that he died there in 1814. And this print may have been lost forever, but it's now safely housed in the State Library of New South Wales in Australia for the public to see. And it's called View of Sydney Cove, New South Wales, from an original picture in the possession of Isaac Clemenston, Esquire, 1802. So if you've ever seen this print on show or in a textbook or what have you, just think of how it was uncovered from a dusty old box in a wardrobe in Bath in 1890. And just before I go, I just wanted to show you this little postcard that I bought. I think I paid £1 or something like that for it. And it's from 1963, and I must say, I think this is one of the best postcards I have in my collection. I hope you are enjoying the holiday. Things have livened up a bit here now that the Air Training Corps boys have moved in. Before they came, there were only a few people about, and most of them were married. There are 7 girls among 138 boys aged 14 to 18. We live a good distance from them and are not allowed in their billets. There is a camp cinema, which is quite exciting. Pickups, decent ones. The weather has been rather dull and windy. It is hilly but pretty here. The planes do not disturb us. Love, Margaret. I just think it's such a funny, very honest little card to her friend there, I think. My dad would probably describe her as boy crazy, I think. So I just wanted to leave you with that little card, and I think it just takes us back to a simple time. Anyway, take care everybody, and I'll see you on the next video.